Let's go now to Alex Ryvchin, who's the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. He joins us tonight from Brisbane. I want to talk to him about anti-Semitism in this country. Alex, good to talk to you again. The political edge of this discussion has certainly ramped up of late with continuing acts of vandalism and domestic terrorism against Jewish Australians. Tell us about your take on that, because you're saying there's a clear partisan divide here, that the Jewish community can see that Labor has just let them down.
Well, you're right, Chris. We're now in a realm of domestic terrorism. For a long time, for the last 15 months, you and I and others have been talking about fracturing social cohesion amid weekly street protests, amid the university encampments, the things that the Greens were doing, the things the clerics were doing to incite hatred and violence against the community. All these things were fracturing the way communities dealt with each other and viewed each other. We're now well beyond that point. There is no social cohesion. We're now in a point of national security. And when you have a synagogue burned and the Prime Minister himself declaring it an act of terrorism, and a few days ago you had the attack on Albanese synagogue, followed the next morning by an attack on Newtown synagogue, which we've since learned wasn't merely another graffiti attack, it was another attempt to incinerate a synagogue, a place of worship in a heavily built up metropolitan area. We are dealing with domestic terrorism. And I think the government has to date failed to grasp the true gravity and severity of the moment. The need to convene national cabinet to say to the state premiers, we are in a crisis right now. We need certain things, including education and policing and sentencing guidelines, to drive this terror from our midst. Because we're in a situation now where the community wakes up every morning and we don't know which synagogue is going to be hit, which school, who's going to suffer for it. But at the moment, it's something that's affecting all Australians, and not enough is being done about it.
Well, and Anthony Albanese hasn't embraced this idea of a national cabinet on this issue. But what pains me is this has all been so obvious for so long. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it was on October the 8th and 9th, 15 months ago, when we were saying there was too much weakness right at the outset in the response to the October the 7th atrocities. And that weakness has indeed increased the problem. At no stage has the government, federal or state, actually done anything.
It was painfully predictable, Chris. And when you saw, just as news of the atrocities was still breaking and people gathered on the streets of the electorate of Tony Burke, the Minister for Multiculturalism and Home Affairs, and praised those attacks and let off fireworks in jubilant celebration of those attacks, and it took weeks for that to be condemned. When you had on university encampments open praise for terrorism, people holding aloft the portraits of terrorist leaders, when you have cries for the destruction of the state of Israel and the annihilation of its Jewish population, and the education minister talks about those slogans and chants meaning different things to different people, it creates the leeway in which extremism thrives. It's not merely a matter for the federal government. We have to be fair, because university vice chancellors, community leaders, and when we're living in a time when influences diffuse and social media influences have enormous sway over public opinion, and they're either turning on the Jewish community or remaining silent and complicit, that's an enormous part of the problem as well.
Thanks for joining us, Alex. I wish it was to discuss some strong moves on this stuff, but it's frustrating, it's dangerous, and I appreciate you always talking to us. Alex Ryvchin there from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry.